So hello and welcome to yet another episode of Biographics. I'm your host, Karl Smallwood, and today we're talking about Brasidas, Sparta's greatest general. And as with all of the videos here at Biographics, this one is based on an article submitted to us by a member of our writing team, that being Radu Alexander. The year 431 was an important one for Greece because it marked the beginning of the greatest internal conflict that completely reshaped the ancient Greek world, the Peloponnesian War. It went on for decades and sought to decide once and for all who was the top dog, Athens or Sparta. The answer, Sparta. Spoilers for those who didn't know, it did happen like 2,400 years ago. And we're not here to talk about the war itself though, but rather a role that one man played in it. Brasidas of Sparta, one of the most decorated officers in the city-state's history. Calling the conflict the Peloponnesian War is a little confusing because there was actually an earlier war between the same sides, more or less, that is referred to as the First Peloponnesian War, that lasted from 460 to 445 BC. However, because the second conflict lasted longer and had a much more decisive impact, it sort of defaulted to becoming the Peloponnesian War. So, what were the sides during this little dust-up? We had Athens versus Sparta, of course. We also had their respective allies. Sparta led the Peloponnesian League, a loose confederation of allies of Greek states that had already been around for about a century by the time of our war. Meanwhile, Athens formed the Delian League in 478 BC, unsurprisingly with itself at the head of the table. The Delian League mostly consisted of coastal and island city-states, and ostensibly it came into existence to protect the Greek world against the Persian threat. However, it also allowed Athens to climb the pecking order pretty fast, and after only a few decades it was butting heads with Sparta over who the number one power spot ranks was. Conflict between the two sides was inevitable, especially considering one side had Spartans on it. As we said, the initial clash ended in 445 BC without a clear winner following the signing of the 30-year peace treaty. But 30 years was way too optimistic because just a few years later, tensions were already starting to rise again. The main catalyst for renewed hostilities between the two Greek powers ended up being a war between the two completely different city-states. On one side, there was Corinth, a major member of the Peloponnesian League, and on the other, there was the island city of Corcyra, better known today as Corfu, which is allied with Athens. At first, Athens offered a defensive alliance, claiming that they would engage Corinthian ships if they tried to invade Corcyra, but would otherwise not get involved. But Athens did get involved, and ultimately, so did Sparta, which meant it was time for war again. So nearby Brad, I'm going to let Pascal take a break now and come in and tell you a story. I recently got a new phone. I was really excited to get a new phone, not for any of the new bells and whistles that were present on it, but because getting a new phone meant getting a new phone number. And for a couple of weeks, there was bliss. And then one day, I really wanted a pizza. So I ordered a pizza, put my number in on the website form. The next day, the spam call started. It's a story as old as time.
Was it at least a good pizza?
It wasn't, no. That's what made it worse. It came cold, and when I called them up to say I ordered it without mushrooms on it, they said, "Oh, sorry, we closed." And how many spam calls would you say you get per week?
At least 3 or 4.
Yeah, it's every single day for me. I don't think my phone has been off silent since I got it, because just every time I'm recording, my phone will go off because there's some company somewhere who got my phone number from some place or another, decided to give me a call in the middle of the workday because they think I'm going to buy their product. Because that's no one's ever done that, and I hate it. If only there was a service that allowed me to just tell each and every single one of those companies to leave me the hell alone.
Well, you'll be happy to know about today's sponsor then, Karl.
Segue! So go on, tell me about today's sponsor, Braddles.
So today's video is sponsored by Aura. So Aura is a service that does exactly what we've been talking about today. They get in contact with the data brokers who hold your information, the ones who steal it from websites and sell it on. Mm-hmm. And they tell these people to get rid. Yes,
and you might think, well, surely I can do that myself, and you can. But have you any idea how many companies have your information? It's a lot, because something these like data scraping companies do is they sell their data to each other. So there could theoretically be dozens, if not hundreds, of separate companies who have access to this information, and going through each one individually is, to put it simply, a pain in the arse.
They also don't make it very easy to do.
Oh, I know this. Have you ever tried unsubscribing from a gym membership, Brad?
The good thing about Aura as well is it isn't just a service that does this.
Okay, so what else does Aura do? Because obviously, that alone is pretty valuable to me, of someone who, appreciates their time and their privacy. Because as a YouTube content creator, my privacy is basically forfeit at this point. And I get that people are going to follow me on social media, but I don't want companies knowing where I am.
Well, I'll just go through the other features while you play with your...
flick my snoot.
What is it again? It's an anteater.
It's an anteater. Look at it. How can you not tell it's an anteater?
I forgot the word.
Look how ripped it is. It's like...
But Aura also offers an antivirus,
Yes.
the VPN,
Yes.
password management, and more.
See, that's all very good. It's an all-in-one app that just takes care of all these things. So rather than having 5 different apps that do all these things, you can just have one that's an all-in-one, just a fire and forget, if you will. So you can either let people continue to exploit and profit off your private information, or you can figuratively tell them to do one by going to aura.com/biographics to start your 2-week free trial. We've also provided the link below in the description. And I feel like Snoot is fast becoming a fixture of my presenting on Biographics, Geographics, and its sister channels. So let's just give Snoot his moment and get some spiral on that anteater, shall we? Yeah, you got him!
That's a good catch.
So I'm back.
Oh, hang on.
Get some spiral on that anteater.
Oh, that was very good.
No. And thus, the Peloponnesian War began, pitting the fearsome Spartan infantry against the naval superiority of Athens. This conflict lasted so long it was broken up into separate phases. And we're actually only going to be covering the first phase here, known as the Archidamian War, after the Spartan king Archidamius II, since that is the only one that Brasidas took part in, because, as you're about to find out, he kicked some ass during that first phase. In fact, he kicked so much ass during that war that he gained a reputation as one of the greatest commanders Sparta had ever seen. The main source of this long conflict was the historian Thucydides, who actually served as a general in the war and would later write an account of it up until the year 411 BC. That's the kind of first-hand account that we rarely get with ancient history, but even though Thucydides was known to be pretty impartial, he was an Athenian after all, so we know which side he was rooting for. Plus, as we're about to find out, he was not a fan of Brasidas, and for good reason, so just keep that in mind as we recount everything we're about to say. Speaking of our protagonist, we first join him in media res at the outbreak of the war in 431 BC at a coastal village called Methone. There's not much we can say about him before the war. It's not like the Spartans were known for their extensive record keeping. All we know is that it was the son of a man named Tellis, who was a Spartiate, aka a full citizen of Sparta. Plutarch also gave Brasidas' mother's name as, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, Archidamian, although he lived almost 500 years later, so we're not really sure how he knew Brasidas' mother's name, but there we go. As we and Zack Snyder have said, Sparta had a pretty strong infantry while Athens had the advantage on the sea. Obviously, each side would have preferred to fight on its home turf, so to speak, so their early strategies involved trying to goad the other one into a disadvantageous battle. Therefore, the Spartan king Archidamius took his troops into Attica, the region of Greece where Athens is located, while the Athenian fleet sailed around the Peloponnesian Peninsula and attacked coastal towns to create strife and rebellion for Sparta. One of those coastal towns was the aforementioned Methone, which made for a juicy target for Athens since it did not have a garrison and its walls were pretty weak. The Athenians laid siege and were surely expecting to gain entry in a matter of days, if not sooner, were it not for the actions of Brasidas. He was in charge of a small force of 100 hoplites, foot soldiers armed with spears and shields, who had been tasked with guarding the district. Upon hearing of the attack on Methone, Brasidas rushed in and took advantage of the scattered Athenian army that was mainly focused on the wall and was not expecting an attack from behind. The hoplites successfully made their way through the enemy ranks and entered the town to reinforce it. At this early stage of the war, the Athenians were not interested in a prolonged siege. Even if they still outnumbered the Spartans 10-1, they wanted to get in and get out. So when Brasidas made that impossible, they decided to just pick up sticks and leave Methone alone. His swift actions earned Brasidas an honour known as the Thanks of Sparta, thus becoming the first officer to gain this distinction in the Peloponnesian War. Following his initial triumph at Methone, Brasidas took part in several important but not necessarily crucial moments in the war, more or less sliding nicely into whatever role was needed of him. His next task was to act as an advisor of sorts, or symbolos, to Semnemnes, an admiral who commanded the Spartan fleet during the first years of the conflict. You might think this was a step down for the legendary Brasidas, but it was more of a punishment for Semnemnes, who met his first naval encounter against Athens with failure, even when he was against a smaller enemy fleet, and there was no dishonour greater for a Spartan than losing against a smaller opposing force. Therefore, to ensure he didn't lose again, he was sent not one, not 2, but 3 commissioners to make sure he got the job done: Brasidas, Timocrates, and Lycophron. He was told in no uncertain terms, do not screw up again. For the next battle, the Spartans planned to take retreat and lure the Athenian fleet, comprised of about 20 vessels, into a strait, and it worked. Sort of. The enemy fleet, led by a guy named Phormio, took the bait and followed the Spartans into the narrow water. By the time they realised what had happened, the Spartans had turned around and pressed the attack. 11 Athenian ships managed to escape, but 9 were sunk. It was a great result for an initial encounter, but the Spartans got too cocky too fast. Wanting to sink another enemy ship, one Spartan vessel sailed ahead of the others, but the Athenians did some fancy manoeuvring, turned around, struck the Spartan ship, and sunk it instead. One of the 3 commissioners, Timocrates, was aboard that vessel, and as it plunged into the water, he committed suicide out of shame. All the other Spartan ships panicked, and while trying to turn around too quickly, some of them ran aground while others took their tails between their legs and sailed to Corinth in safer waters. Ultimately though, both sides claimed victory in that battle, though neither one truly covered itself in glory. That is likely why Semnemnus and Brasidas settled on a risky plan to attack the port of Athens itself, Piraeus. They were going to sail from Corinth to Megara in Attica, and from there launch a naval attack on Piraeus, thinking that the port would not be heavily guarded, since the Athenians would not expect to strike right at the heart of their naval headquarters. And they were right, and their plan very well might have worked, but for unknown reasons, the Spartans chickened out at the last moment and opted instead to attack the Athenian port on the island of Semnemnus. And this was successful, it's just that Piraeus would have been a much bigger prize. Common thinking suggests that Semnemnus and Brasidas didn't want to go back home without one solid victory under their belt, so they just took what they could get. Brasidas' next engagement came in 427 BC, when he once again acted as Symbolus, this time to a guy named, and again I hope I pronounce this correctly, Alcidas, who was trying to put down a rebellion in Corcyra. But for whatever reason, the Corcyrans decided to act against the advice of Spartans when it came to defending against a much greater enemy force. So when Brasidas heard that the Athenian fleet was approaching, he basically said, screw this, I'm going home, and left the city to their fate. Brasidas then showed up at the Battle of Pylos in 425 BC, which ended up being a decisive victory for Athens, even though Brasidas himself was singled out for bravery with which he fought. Plutarch gives us a quick account which almost certainly didn't happen the way he tells it, but it's just too badass not to include. The historian says that during a battle, a spear penetrated through Brasidas' shield and pierced him, and at that point Brasidas pulled out the spear and killed his opponent using his own weapon. Later, when asked how he was injured, Brasidas replied in typical laconic Spartan fashion, "When my shield betrayed me." In 424 BC, it was time for Brasidas to cast off the kid gloves. No more advising other guys, he was given command of his own army and sent to Thrace to cause some trouble. But before he set on his way, he heard of an incoming attack on Megara, so he sailed from there first, and together with the Boeotians and the Megarians, managed to drive back the Athenians. From there, Brasidas travelled to Thessaly, where he met up with an ally, King Perdiccas II of Macedon. And there's a lot of Greek words coming up, so we're just going to go nice and slowly through this next section, folks. Bear with me. The king wanted to fight his neighbours, the Lycincians, led by King Archidamian. But Brasidas had other ideas. He wasn't there to settle a personal grudge. Instead, he asked for an audience to the Lycincians, because even though he was a Spartan and not really one for long speeches, even his greatest critics were forced to admit he wasn't a bad speaker. During this meeting, he persuaded them to revolt against Athens. It didn't really take though, and just a year later the Lycincians switched sides again and with reinforcements defeated the Macedonians and the Spartans in battle. All of these were just side quests though, and nothing to do with Brasidas' end goal in Thrace. He was there to take Amphipolis, a key city in the region, and he did. Quite easily, in fact. He laid siege, and because he knew the enemy reinforcements were on the way, Brasidas offered generous terms of surrender, guaranteeing the safety of those who wanted to leave and allowing those who stayed to keep their property. The people of Amphipolis were happy with this arrangement. Turns out they weren't really fans of Athens that much anyway. Allegedly, only hours after Brasidas entered the city, the Athenian reinforcements arrived, led by his longtime rival Thucydides himself. Athens was furious with the loss of Amphipolis and put the entire blame on Thucydides, who was brought to trial and charged with, again hopefully I pronounce this correctly, prodosia, which basically meant he'd failed as a general. Thucydides was found guilty and sent into exile for 20 years, thus ending his part in the war and this story. Brasidas' involvement would also end shortly thereafter. Following the loss of Amphipolis, the two sides agreed to a one-year armistice. Once it ended in 422 BC though, Cleon, one of the most prominent Athenian generals, marched to Thrace, determined to take back the city again. And here is where Brasidas showed that fearsome reputation the Spartans had well earned. Although the two sides were about even, Cleon preferred to wait for reinforcements. Trapped inside the city, Brasidas reasoned that if they were going to just sit around and do nothing, they would almost certainly lose. So instead, he opened the gate and led a sudden, audacious charge right into the centre of the enemy force. The gamble was a stunning and rousing success. The Athenians were left shocked, panicked and confused and broke ranks to run away, because I can't imagine there were many sights more terrifying on the ancient battlefield than a bunch of Spartans running directly towards you, ready to stab you. Cleon himself was killed in this battle, and the day was won. There was just one problem though. Brasidas had been mortally wounded during the fighting. He survived long enough to receive word of their victory, and then died and was buried as a hero in Amphipolis. After both Sparta and Athens had lost two of their best generals in one battle, they signed a peace treaty in 421 BC. It didn't last and the Peloponnesian War resumed. Who knows, if you like this video, maybe we'll cover Lysander, another one of the top Spartan leaders, and bring the war to its conclusion. If you want to see more videos like this, you can like the video. If you've got any comments, your favourite Spartan quotes, any favourite figures from that point in history you want us to cover on another episode, we can do that. If you want to see more, subscribe and check out the sister channels to Biographics, in particular Top 10s, and go check out my smooth-headed predecessor talking about some badass Spartan quotes, some articles I wrote 5-6 years ago. I know I'm certainly going to look them back up to see which ones I forgot, butchered and or didn't mention in this video. Either way, hope everyone watching this has the day that they deserve, and as always, cheers.